All right, welcome back to part 2 on conflict resolution, Vineyard 401. We want to take a moment and look a little bit at how to communicate around some of these issues. I've already given you a few suggestions on each of the 5 types of conflicts that you can have as a leader, but I want to drill down on a couple of them a little bit more. Obviously, the first important one is dealing with hurts, asking for forgiveness. You've got to deal with that first to move beyond that. But then, secondly, understanding your personality, other people's personality, your communication style, other people's communication styles, gaining and understanding and even learning to value other styles other than your own is a really big deal. And then experience and time and teams and people will then help you iron out some of those issues. But that's a big self-awareness journey. That takes time. Leaders grow over time in these areas. One of the areas I wanted to talk about was expectations, because I found this was a big one, and some of these are honestly really difficult to win in or to move forward in. I remember I was at a stage in our church development where the church was getting larger. We were into the size of 300 or 400 people, and I had 3 other pastors on staff, and so we're at a size of the church where I wasn't the pastor for every single person in the church. It was at a time where I couldn't do all the counseling, I couldn't do all the weddings, I couldn't do all the funerals, I couldn't do all the things. I couldn't be available for everybody all the time. However, I had some people in the church who expected me to be available for them all the time. I remember one couple, I have a date night on Friday night with my wife, and I often say, you don't want to be in a situation where you get my attention on a Friday, because it probably means you died and I'm going to need to do your funeral or something. I mean, it's a major crisis, because I'm not going to cancel a date with my wife to try to work out your marriage problem that you've had for 15 years and you're just now telling me on Friday. It'll wait till Monday or Tuesday or Wednesday. And so, it was at a time when I just wasn't personally, but I had a couple in my church that was used to having a very small church pastor who would just jump at everything they needed. They got in a fight one Friday night, and they got a hold of me while I was out on my date with my wife. And when I didn't leave my date with my wife to come help them work on their marriage, they left the church that weekend, because their expectation was that they needed to be in a church where the pastor would jump at anything they needed to be done. Well, that's kind of a no-win situation. So I just want to say, as a leader, you're going to have some people have expectations on you that are actually impossible, that actually might even be inappropriate expectations, that might even be broken expectations that come out of broken places in their life, okay? This is where at Vineyard Church our ministries of inner healing, Oaks of Righteousness come into play. I really believe everybody needs to go through Oaks of Righteousness and inner healing. Number 1, we all have stuff that needs to be healed. Number 2, all of you are going to be working with people who need stuff that needs to be healed, all right? And so the more you understand the inner workings of the heart, the inner workings of false belief systems, the inner workings of root bitterness, the inner workings of inner vows, the inner workings of rejection issues, all these kinds of things that stir around in people's hearts that are brokenness issue, it gives you more sensitivity to why some people bring expectations to the table that are inappropriate. And when you can begin to have a sensitivity to that, rather than responding to their immaturity and their brokenness, sometimes, if they give you an opportunity, you can actually lovingly challenge them that say, hey, this may be an issue that you need to work on, and we've got a great ministry that could help you deal with that. And one of the keys to that is that if it's a brokenness issue, you won't be the only one that they've had false expectations on. It'll be something that has worked itself out in most of their relationships, right? And so it's a broken pattern in the way they relate to people. So the more sensitivity you have to that, the more you can go, I know some people that have had that same issue And God can bring healing to that, and it'll help all of your relationships, not just ours, And so you can kind of buffer it that way and lovingly direct. And I've seen a lot of people get into inner healing ministries just because I identified an issue fairly quickly and was able to give them some direction toward healing. All right, so that's a big area in expectations. Philosophy of ministry is kind of a mixture of things. The philosophy of ministry would include theological issues. Philosophy of ministry would include cultural issues. Philosophy of ministry would just even maybe include, procedural issues. And so an organization, a community, creates culture over time. That culture is created through thousands of conversations. It's created through thousands of actions. It's created through what we teach, what we preach, how we live, all those kinds of things. So philosophy of ministry is a big, big thing. And you really as a leader have to be clear about your philosophy of ministry. Because people are going to bump into the culture, especially in an organization or a community that's been around for a while. And they're going to come into it, and they might be from a different culture or from a different background, from a different theological belief system. And so they come into yours, and they're bumping into cultural things that they don't understand or they can't get a handle on. Like one of our things is we're pretty grace-based around here. We'll kind of love people where they're at, and we'll actually love people even if they're still living messy lives, even if they're not kind of cleaned up, right? And we'll let them hang out with us, and we'll kind of love them even if they're even not making a huge effort to get cleaned up. On the other hand, our culture is one that we're praying that the Spirit of God, the love of Jesus and the people of God and the Word of God breaks through that person's heart to spark in them a new hunger for God, a new desire to grow, a new love for Jesus that begins to work itself out in healing, in holiness, in character development, in becoming more like Jesus, right? But there are some church cultures that don't have much patience for messy people. And so messy people feel judged, and they certainly don't feel loved in some church cultures. Well, if you're from that kind of church culture, and then all of a sudden you come into our church culture, and we're loving people that they used to feel, like keep a distance at or reject them unless they got cleaned up really fast, then all of a sudden you can be going, well, do you guys really care about holiness or character or this or that or the other? It can bring all kinds of questions that if we don't answer that through our philosophy of ministry and why we do what we do, then they can be confused about it. They can make assumptions about why we do what we do that aren't even true, all right? And so philosophy of ministry is kind of a big, big item, particularly when you live in a community that teaches things from Scripture, that has certain perspectives on things, that has certain attitudes that create culture and lifestyle and the way we talk and the way we act and the way we live. It's challenging but helpful to constantly surface our core values, our vision, mission, goals, even some of our doctrinal issues. And so what I found is that people come to a church community and they might stay for all kinds of reasons. Their kids like the children's ministry, or they liked a particular group that they came to, or they came to an outreach or something like that. And they might hang out with us for a while, but then there's about 5 other things they don't understand, and there's maybe 2 things they don't like. And so ultimately, leaders in communities are always navigating these philosophy of ministries issues with people. And a lot of the times a lot of them are non-negotiables. Like, we're not going to change our grace-based atmosphere just because somebody comes along and doesn't like our grace-based atmosphere. That's a core value for us. So somebody could bump up against it, not like it, and they could express that, and I could go, okay, yeah, I hear you. I understand where you're coming from, but this is where we're coming from, and I would graciously try to describe where we're coming from, why we do that, why we feel like it's even biblical. But in the end, they're going to have to make a decision, right, as to whether they they can go with it, whether they can embrace it, or whether they can't stand it and they need to go find another church. And so one of the keys about philosophy of ministry is you kind of have to have this ability to lovingly explain things to people that ask questions. And don't feel bad when they ask questions. Many times they're just trying to understand, and they had one cultural experience and they don't understand this cultural experience. And so we have to have the patience to listen to the questions, be loving toward them, but then ultimately be able to express why we do what we do. And then they kind of have to make a decision. And so sometimes the philosophy ministry issues is really what we need is alignment with our philosophy ministry. If a person's going to stay here over the long haul, they need to align with some of our core values, our core philosophy ministry, our core culture. Otherwise, they're just going to be floundering and frustrated. And there may be a better church for some people. We want to love them coming in, and we want to love them going out, actually. And I've tried to teach this through the years, and I think I might have heard this from John Wimber the first time, but he liked to talk about how he likes to treat people with an open hand, all right? And so people come from all different kinds of reasons into our community. We're going to love them coming in. We're going to show God's grace. We're going to pray that the atmosphere of worship, the atmosphere of the teaching of God's Word, the atmosphere of God's grace and God's love for us, even in our brokenness. We're going to pray the atmosphere of God's people and the Spirit of God and the stories of God changing lives, that the Spirit uses all of that to then spark new hunger in people's hearts to where they begin to grow, they begin to change, they begin to develop that walk with God. But we're always treating them with an open hand. We're never like clamping down on them in terms of what our I'm not sure how to put this. We're not clamping down in terms of trying to keep them if they don't fit. Okay, that's probably the best way to say it. So we keep an open hand. And some people are going to love this environment. They're going to flourish here. They're going to, the more they learn, the more they're going to love it, the more they're going to embrace it. They feel like it's them. It fits like a glove. On the other hand, you might have some people who like part of it but don't like all of it. And they might come to a decision where they think, I think there's a better church for us somewhere. I think that's where we keep the open hand, right? And we bless them on the way out. And even if they leave poorly, we're not going to say negative things. We're going to love them. We're going to say the best things we can about them. What I've seen through the years, because we've done this a lot, is if we receive people well and release people well, it's amazing how life changes and people will come back around to love again because we've treated them with love. And even if they didn't act the best, I've had so many people that have left under poor conditions that have come back and re-embraced us because we loved them on the way out, right? So sometimes you have to learn to let people go, is the big point here. You have to learn to lovingly explain and express philosophy of ministry, why we do what we do, why we believe what we believe. But on the other hand, you have to kind of keep an open hand and let people go with grace and love. And so that's really the deal about philosophy of ministry. I think it's critically important for leaders to align with philosophy of ministry. And so that's maybe another talk that we'll be having later on in this course. But I want to encourage you now to think through three things as I've described this. Number one, after you get everything out on the table, after you figure out how to talk about or what the issues are that you're facing, number one, you want to be talking about how are we going to move forward? How will we move forward? The point here is that you don't want to circle the same conflict again and again and again and again and again. It's like, what steps are we going to take to move forward so that we don't repeat this? Where possible, you want to explore win-win solutions. How can both people come out with a win? It's not, I win, you lose, but how can both people win? So you communicate around what their expectations are, what the philosophy of ministry is, all that kind of stuff. And talk about, once you've healed hurts, you're going to talk about how can we communicate with each other in the future, how can we understand each other better, what signals do we need with each other to avoid this conflict coming up again and again and again. And so win-win is a great way to approach it. And then the third thing is philosophy of ministry alignment. Of ministry alignment. Help me out. L-I, alignment. There we go. All right. And so that's where really at the core values, at the doctrinal level, some things do need to align, and you need to have those conversations with people so that they can understand and make their choice. In the end, you have to be able to keep an open hand and gracefully, lovingly let people make a choice to align or not. We can't force people to do that. We're not going to force them against their conscience or anything like that. We want to be loving. We want to be biblical. We want to explain the best we can of why we do what we do, why we live how we live. But then in the end, they're going to have to make the choice whether this is the community for them. So at the leadership level, these things go on all the time. And the more people you lead, the more influence you have, the more people are going to be influenced by you, the more opportunities there are for conflict. So for a leader, you have to grow in the ability to, I would say maybe embrace conflict. I know that's maybe sounds weird, but what I mean is to creatively engage conflict and ultimately come out in good places. I would say if you can follow this basic set of skills, that you're going to come out in a really good place 90% of the time with people. I would say that would be my experience. And so there are some times when people just are too wounded, or they can't communicate, or they just won't dance. They're just not going to enter into that face-to-face conversation and have those honest talks. But where they will do that, and if you bring these skill sets to the table, I think you'll find that God will work through conflict, and I think you'll even find that you can come out in better places if you handle conflict well. You can actually go deeper with people and a greater love, a greater respect when you deal with conflict in a godly way. All right, let's go into our ministry interactive time.